Right.
But I think people take this little idea that they have of like, this is a good, healthy choice. And then we try to do 50 things all at once. Like, now I'm going to eat like this, and I'm going to cut out all the sugar, and I'm going to be raw vegan. And now I'm going to go swim for 20 minutes every morning. And then I'm going to go weight lift for an hour at night. And then on weekends, I'm also adding in a yoga class. And now I'm going to add in, right. And we just like, and I'm going to give up coffee. And like, they just add in like all this stuff, and it's overwhelming. And it's obsessive in their minds, and now we're in a negative headspace, and oh, it doesn't work, and then they throw the whole thing out like 20 days later, because
Yeah.
willpower is not like a human trait. It's not that like this other person over here who has a raw vegan food blog, right? Like, it's not that their willpower is better and they're just better people than me. Like, that's not it at all. Like, you only see that small snapshot of their life. You're not seeing the whole journey it takes to get there. You're not seeing what the rest of their day looks like.
What's up, you beautiful beasts? I'm Katie. I'm on a mission to help humans become their favorite versions of themselves and to strive for overall health by healing their relationship to food and exercise, healing their relationship to their body, and most importantly, healing their relationship to themselves, all without ever having to step on a scale. I have had the privilege to talk to all kinds of different humans who have been through a plethora of experiences just being a human and existing. I believe that every single time someone shares their story, at least one person listening will learn from it, be inspired by it, and maybe, just maybe, even change the entire direction of their life. These are the stories of humans unveiling their beautiful beast. Keep listening. This is the Unveiling the Beast podcast.
Well, welcome to the Unveiling the Beast podcast. Thank you for saying yes. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and why you think you are who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Sharon McCaskill. I'm a registered dietitian. And I also am a wife. I have two daughters. And yeah, I think just why I am who I am, why I'm a dietitian, was I watched my husband go through a major journey with chronic illness. He ended up doing a super long, like 2 month stint in the hospital when our youngest was a newborn. And I just saw the way that the dietitians at the hospital played a role in his being healthy again, his ability to still be with us today. And I admired that and loved it and decided that I wanted to be a part of it. So, yeah.
I love that. And so then now you're an intuitive eating informed registered dietitian, right? Is
Yes.
that correct? So how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I would definitely say I was always interested in nutrition. So, I'm going to use some diet language here as a
Yeah,
warning.
no,
Um,
it's okay.
Yeah. In high school, I mean, my mom was always trying something new, right? Some new diet, some new whatever. It was the early 2000s, right? There was just a lot of pressure in the media, much more than today, all of that type of stuff. And I just read every book that she picked up on dieting. I found it really fascinating. All through college, I would watch documentaries about food, and I always thought it was interesting, but it was one of those things where you don't necessarily know like what jobs exist, right? So like, somebody's writing this book, but like, how are they credentialed to be able to write a book on this? I have no idea, right? Like,
Right.
I'm just, yeah. So all of that in high school, I did end up developing an eating disorder. I came through that, thankfully. And when my husband got really sick, it just was kind of this interesting thing where I was like, oh, there's science here about food, like actual science, not just like bestsellers, right? Like, there's actual science
Right.
concerning
Yeah.
food. And that was so interesting to me. And all through that journey of becoming a dietitian, I started to learn more about health at every size and some of these other approaches. And I read a lot of books. I started listening to podcasts from a lot of intuitive eating dietitians. I read the book on intuitive eating, all of that. And I'm like, this is so fascinating. And it makes so much sense. And it was just bringing up all that, I guess, nutrition baggage that I had from previous to becoming a dietitian. And it was so interesting to me to just see that difference between, like you're not just this way because of choices that you make, and decisions that you make are not always in your control, right? Like some of these things, it was
Yeah.
just so interesting to me to see like, oh, right. Like, so actual weight loss doesn't necessarily reduce cardiac risk because we can't divorce it from all those healthy habits people are making necessarily, right? And all these studies and digging in and asking questions. And I guess that's kind of my role of how I became an intuitive eating informed registered dietitian, practicing from a Hayes approach. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and I would say with the population that I primarily work with. So, as I said, I was inspired by my husband's journey with health. He was severely malnourished. He has celiac disease and type 1 diabetes. We
Mm.
were sticking to a gluten-free diet. We had it down, but he ended up developing refractory celiac. So even though he ate gluten-free, his body was still attacking him like he was eating gluten, and he was
Huh.
severely malnourished. And I just saw all the effects of that and everything mentally and physically that went into that malnourishment. And a lot of the clients that I've seen today, a lot of the people I've talked to with celiac disease, when you have one of those medical dietary restrictions, your risk of developing an eating disorder is so much higher. And I think it's essential to practice from that intuitive eating standpoint, right? Like when you have this necessary restriction placed on you, we need to kind of flip the script and understand, like, in this culture that's food is highly cultural, right? Like we need to find these substitutes for things that you can eat in a safe way that also brings you that same amount of joy, that brings you those memories with grandma, right? All those other things that food inspires within you.
Yeah. I
That was
love that.
maybe a
And
really long answer to your
no,
question.
that's good. I love it. Yeah, listeners know that I read the book Intuitive Eating and it just changed like everything in my life because I grew up on a diet. I spent 27
Yeah.
years on a diet. And so it just complete because I've I'm a personal trainer, fitness nutrition specialist. I'm not a registered dietitian, but I have education in nutrition, right? And so I know I'm like I know what to do, and people know what to do, but why aren't they doing it? And then I read intuitive eating. I'm like, oh, this is the missing piece. So
Yes.
I do want to ask you though, it it's very confusing for like the new person who's been stuck in diet culture for 27 years, for example. And so like I know a lot of times it gets twisted or misunderstood. And so one of the pieces that I wanted to ask you about is the nutrition piece. Like one of the things I think, or one of the principles that gets twisted is unconditional permission to eat, right? And people take that to mean eat whatever you want all day long, whenever you want, and they completely forget about the nutrition piece. Like nutrition is huge in our health. And so what would you say to the person that gets that confused?
Yeah, so two things. I think we have to go through that unconditional permission to eat process before we start to really take hold of that nutrition piece. So I think some people are so scared, like, well, if I let myself eat the macaroni and cheese, that's all I'll eat forever. And you have to kind of challenge that, like, is that really all you're going to eat forever? Like, if you have unconditional permission that, like, this week you could go to the store and only buy mac and cheese. And if you have celiac, gluten-free mac and cheese, right? But like, and if
Right.
that's all you eat all week, like, let's try that. No one's happy. No one's happy if that's the
Yeah.
only thing they eat forever, right? But like now it's there and you have unconditional permission to eat it whenever you want. And I think when I think about our mental journey with nutrition, right? Like we've all had that experience of like buying that forbidden treat or like taking your child's Halloween candy or whatever it is and like eating it in the pantry where nobody can see you. And like, do you feel better after that? Really? Like, maybe in some ways, because like it tasted good. So you had a little bit of pleasure, but like, there's a big difference between that and then being like, you know what? I am craving a Snickers bar. Like, I just really am
Mm.
craving a Snickers bar. And you give yourself permission to get one. you eat it without hiding it from anybody, right? And like you give yourself permission to like savor it and enjoy it. And so I think what people see as this like unconditional permission to eat is they just picture that what that is in reality is you just like binging everything in sight. And that's really not what it is. Like when we have unconditional permission to eat food, we can eat half of that Snickers bar and be like, whew, I really enjoyed this. My pleasure from this is like decreasing a little bit. Like maybe you have this experience, not necessarily. If you don't, eat that Snickers bar, it's fine, right? But like maybe like my pleasure is deteriorating a little bit as I eat it. There's a little bit of a diminishing returns. Like you buy that king size bar, right? And you're like, I overestimated this. I'm gonna save this for like after dinner, maybe or just the next time I really want a Snickers bar, and it's no big deal, right? Like I think that that's kind of the piece that people are missing. And I really think that like we've all kind of experienced those times where you eat just too much food that just was like too sensorily pleasurable or something. I don't know, but like you eat too much, you don't really feel good afterwards. Like that's not enjoyable. That's not pleasurable.
Yeah.
But when you eat a nice balanced meal, you don't have a crash afterwards, you're feeling like this, and then you can go enjoy that treat that you've had, like awesome. Right? Like we build in those pieces bit by bit. And I also think that this idea of unconditional permission to eat is also kind of like magnified in nutrition in the sense that like, yeah, like I love for all of my clients to eat their 5 fruits and vegetables every day. Some people just really don't like fruits and vegetables. And I think discovering like I really just love like apples and grapes and I love them, and other fruits just really don't do it for me. Like, okay, eat apples and grapes. They're great for you. Like eat them, enjoy them, right?
Yeah.
Like that's great. Like, but discovering these other ways to enjoy food, or like I love my veggies, but only with ranch. Okay, eat your veggies with ranch. You're still getting that nutrition from the veggies.
Yeah. And then sometimes people are afraid of the ranch because there's fat in it and they don't realize the fat actually helps you absorb some of the fat soluble vitamins that are in the veggies. And so yeah, I think what it is it's so much, it reduces the stress of worrying so much about what's going into our mouths. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of fear mongering going out there, especially about sugar specifically, but all kinds of things like seed oils and people standing in grocery stores and grabbing a box of cereal and saying, "Are you feeding poison to your kids?" I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. And I think I react that way now because I was stuck in that for so long, but it's just so, I think relieving is the word I'm looking for. When you learn this concept and you start learning how to implement these principles into your life, it's just like it gives permission to breathe again when it comes to food.
For sure. And when I say like I'm a dietitian practicing an intuitive eating standpoint and I practice health at every size, right? I think people think like, so what are you even teaching them for nutrition? Like, which is so funny to me because I'm like, so are you saying that somebody like based on their body type can't live in a healthier way even if their body doesn't change? Like that like blows my mind. And I think we all know that that's not a true statement, right? Like we know that our lifestyle is different than everybody else's lifestyle, right? Like our circumstances are different than everybody else's and our bodies are going to be different than everybody else's, right? And I just think that like any of that, I love behavioral change and behavioral science too, right? And like I just love that like we can make these little changes. We can do habit stacking. There's all these other principles that's like building healthy habits. Just because we're building a habit, we're like we go from eating no fruits and vegetables to enjoying one fruit or vegetable a day, right? Like I think people try to minimize that and be like, well, what's that going to do in the long run? Like that can do a lot in the long run, right? Like these little tiny things that we do can be a lot in the long run. And we're not taking things away, right? Necessarily, but like adding in joyful movement and adding in these other things can just really create this snowball momentum where things build and we're excited and we're able to do things.
But yeah, I like I always tell my clients either throw your scale away or hide it for a while, because weight is not a behavior, and we focus on behaviors and habits and like doing the things that make you feel good rather than focusing on the weight. And I tell them, if your body needs to lose weight and you're doing these habits, you'll lose weight. And if your body needs to gain weight and you're doing these habits, you'll gain weight. So like stop putting so much glorification on that number, because it will change every single day. It will change every single hour. It will change, like, it's not, what is it? Somebody said it's literally just the representation of the gravitational pull of our bodies or something like that. I might have gotten that quote wrong, but
Yeah.
and so, but then, and then the argument against that is, well, you don't care about obesity and overweight and you don't care, weight matters. I'm like, but the focus, like that being your goal, that's not what matters. The goal is the healthy behaviors and habits. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Did I
for
say that
sure.
correctly?
And yes, 100%. And I think that those habits and our mental space around food is more important than what any scale can show us. So like in my realm of work, right, working with people, a lot of people that have gut health issues, that have celiac disease, that have EOE, some things like that, colitis of some sort. I'm one of those dietitians that practices from a HAES standpoint that does weigh my patients. And the reason why is because this is a data point. And if somebody with a digestive issue starts to lose weight really quickly and we don't know why, like, I want to know, because there's something seriously wrong, like with their health. And so I think we need to move away from using weight to be like, oh, this number on the scale determines your standing in health. And it's more of a data point along a large set, right? So like, I found it so fascinating in school when I studied pediatric nutrition and we were studying like weight and stuff among them in these CDC charts, and as well as the WHO charts. Children are studied on a growth curve when it comes to weight. And if you're going to a family health practitioner or something that does not do this with your child, then I would probably say maybe switch to a different doctor. Like, anybody under the age of 19 should be tracked on a growth curve. And what we're looking for is not where they are on that curve in terms of percentile necessarily, but are they staying on their growth curve, right? That's what we look at with kids. But then all of a sudden a child turns 19 and we put them in these boxes over on the BMI chart. You know what I mean? And I'm like, how can we take a child and be like, wow, you were a big baby right at birth, right? Like, you were in the 96th percentile as a 1-year-old, right? And like, you're a happy, healthy 1-year-old because you've always been in the 96th percentile. And now you're a happy, healthy 13-year-old because you've always been in the 96th percentile for weight. Like, you're growing exactly on target between like the 90s, like 4th and 98th percentile. Like, you are just growing the way you're meant to grow. And now you're 20, sorry. Like, that just blows my mind. And that's literally what we do in the healthcare field with people and their weight and their bodies. But on that sense, right? Like, if I'm working with a client and they are going right from like the 14th percentile to like the 90th percentile, there's something going on. Right?
Yeah.
That is not normal behavior for our bodies, right? And I think that, so all that to say, like, I think that there is some value in weight, but it has to be looked at in the bigger picture and in the bigger scheme of things. Especially when we're dealing with people who have digestive health or some other condition where a weight fluctuation, right? If they have issues with sodium and water retention, like in these cases, weight is an important piece of data, but not for the purpose of typecasting them into a category based on like health, just based on weight alone.
Yeah. I like that you say that too, because when we just put our, like, saying it as it's just a data point. When we just put our focus on that one thing, we miss everything else that's going on around us. For example, like if somebody starts strength training and, joyful movement, dancing, for example, strength training and going to Zumba classes, and they're only focused on this number on the scale, they're going to miss the fact that they're lifting 20 more pounds than they were last month for their deadlift. They're going to miss the fact that they're getting much better sleep. They're going to miss the fact that their sleep not only is increasing with time, but also, what's the word? Oh my gosh.
How heavy they sleep?
I'm leaving this in. Quality.
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, you get the point. Like when we focus on just the one data point, we miss everything else that's all the other things that are improving in our lives when we start these healthy behaviors.
For sure. And
So
I think
put in other words, yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I think along those same lines, like one of the things that I think happens a lot, and I think especially in this day of like social media, we have instant gratification at our fingertips all the time, right? And that's good and bad in different ways, right? But I think a lot of times we think like, okay, well, I need to work on whatever, like, right? Like maybe I'm somebody who didn't grow up eating whole foods at all. Like I only know foods in a form that's very different than how the food itself was created. So maybe I want to incorporate more of that in my life. Like, okay, great goal. Like that's not a bad goal for someone to have. But I think the danger that we have is that people look up, how do I do this? And then they find these people that are eating like raw vegan, which maybe is fine for that person and their situation and what they're doing. Like, I'm not going to say that that's wrong for everybody or whatever, right? Like,
Right.
but I think people take this little idea that they have of like, this is a good, healthy choice. And then we try to do 50 things all at once. Like, now I'm going to eat like this and I'm going to cut out all the sugar and I'm going to be raw vegan. And now I'm going to go swim for 20 minutes every morning. And then I'm going to go weight lift for an hour at night. And then on weekends, I'm also adding in a yoga class. And now I'm going to add in, right? And we just like, and I'm going to give up coffee. And like, they just add in like all this stuff and it's overwhelming and it's obsessive in their minds. And now we're in a negative headspace and, oh, it doesn't work. And then they throw the whole thing out like 20 days later because willpower is not like a human trait. It's not that like this other person over here who has a raw vegan food blog, right? Like it's not that their willpower is better and they're just better people than me. Like that's not it at all. Like you only see that small snapshot of their life. You're not seeing the whole journey it takes to get there. You're not seeing what the rest of their day looks like. You're not seeing whether they go to a 9 to 5 and then do this after, or if their whole life literally revolves around processing their food to be eaten all day long, right? Like we're not seeing these other pictures. And I think it's just, I love intuitive eating's role of kind of going with like, okay, so what goal feels good for you in your moment that we can continue to work on, that we can actually get there. It's achievable. It's something that we can do without being obsessive over it. It fits into the lifestyle that you already live and love. Like, what can we start incorporating a little bit? And I think is it Atomic Habits where they talk about like the 1% better every day, like that little tiny bit. And we're going to have days where we don't hit that 1% better, like because it's life. And that goes with that unconditional permission to eat, right? Like that's life. And that happens and it's okay. And there's no guilt or shame about it because here I am 60 days later and I didn't do any joyful movement today, which I've been trying to do at least like 5 minutes of every day was my achievable goal, right? But I hit it all those 60 days before and I missed it today. And I'm going to shrug it off and pick up tomorrow and just keep enjoying the thing that I enjoy doing. And it's okay. right? Like, or maybe my circumstance changed and now this other thing that I used to enjoy just isn't bringing me joy anymore. So let's see how I can shift and figure out what the next thing is that is going to bring me joy, right? Like, I think we look at these things as like this all or nothing approach and everything's black and white. And this works for this person over here. And my friend was successful doing this, but like, you're your own person. And not much in our life is black and white. Like, not much exists in that.
Yeah.
Right. The rest of it is like the spectrum.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really helps my clients, and one thing that really helped me in my healing and still helps, is the concept of noticing without judging. And so like that means just like noticing, oh, like for me it was, oh, I hide my food in my car when I'm eating, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. And so what that does for us is like we start to notice things maybe that we haven't noticed before, or look at something without the judgment for the first time, so that we can either look to see where that behavior is coming from, and there doesn't always have to be an answer. And then also, because we've noticed it and it's in our awareness now we have the choice to change it or not, and we don't always have to change it. It's just now we know, right? And so I think it's super helpful with the intuitive eating thing. Like, okay, I'm going to eat this entire row of Oreos because I'm feeling this certain emotion, and it's a noticing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I know that I eat this entire sleeve of Oreos when I'm feeling this emotion. Do I want to change it, or do I want to just leave it and be okay with either decision? But in ultimately, it puts the person at choice, is what I'm getting at.
For sure. And I think we all kind of have choice in our own lives, right? We have to have that autonomy to make decisions. And I think as a dietitian, right, like, I think that's kind of my role, right? To inform and say, well, here's some information. Here's something I notice. Is that something that you notice? Right. And put it back on them. And like, what goals do you want to set this week? Like, I can't sit here. Like, people are like, oh, food police is coming. Like, no, that's not who I am. Like, my job is to help you come alongside and find success in your journey, whatever that journey looks like for you, which is going to be different than the client that I saw an hour ago, right? Like, you're all in different places of life and you're all on different health journeys to reach where you are and where you want to go.
I wanted to kind of rewind a little bit. You brought up BMI. I would love to hear your explanation of what it is and your opinion on the BMI system.
So BMI is a number that got co-opted by insurance companies to decide whether or not they wanted to insure people. It was not created to be a measure of health in any way. That was not its initial creation. There's a lot of resources people can find. I don't feel like I need to rehash the whole thing of
and I can put some history in the show notes.
Great. Yeah. The history of BMI, why it was created. It has, I think we live in a day and age where a lot of people like to throw out everything as like, oh, that's racist. That's racist. But like, this is something that actually is. And it really was created during the time of like Nazism, right? And people are trying to typecast and like, we are the supreme race. And how can we typecast people that we don't want to fit into our race? Like, what's an easy easy way based in data that we can exclude them? And that's basically how it was created. It kind of went away, right? With the fall of World War II after all of that, right? Like, it kind of went away, but then insurance companies are like, we want to save money. And they found that and we're like, hey, we can use this. Not to say that insurance companies necessarily are inherently racist, but they took this thing and changed it, right? Something that I think is helpful for people to understand about BMI too, and there's tons of data on this, is like in the 90s, they just decided to change BMI and make it even lower. So like overnight, millions of Americans woke up and were like, what? I'm obese all of a sudden? Like, I was not obese yesterday on the BMI scale and now I am, right? So, and I know I'm oversimplifying it. Okay. This is a very
Right.
oversimplified
Yeah.
explanation of it. I just don't find it useful. And I do not think that most research and data supports it as a useful tool for typecasting health. Regardless of how it was created, regardless of what drama, regardless of money, all of that, not much has shown that it's a useful tool for typecasting health. And I think the best data that we can see on that is a whole bunch of research, like a multitude of research that has shown that people at an overweight BMI have more longevity than individuals in any other weight category, which is really interesting. To the point that once you switch into, so I talked about BMI for children, right? It exists on that growth curve, is how we kind of track that. That's different for adults. That is also different for older adults in the US. So people that are 65 or older, your BMI gets calculated differently in terms of that range of who's in normal, overweight, obese. We now change that because we recognize that people at a higher weight at the age 65 and up have much better health outcomes if they're diagnosed with some type of wasting disease, cancer, etc. So we actually look for people to be at that higher BMI range when they enter that aging process, which is also really interesting. So all that to say, there's a lot of nuance there. And anybody that just decides like, oh, I'm going to start exercising, and they go to MyFitnessPal and start tracking things, and then all of a sudden they're like, whoop, what? I'm overweight? I didn't know that. Like, okay, ignore that. Like,
Yeah.
let that go. Let that go. Because again, we have to look at, it's one small piece. Like your weight is one small piece in a big picture. Muscle weighs much more than fat. And I think most people that are concerned about BMI probably don't have the issue of like Olympians where they're like, well, I'm in this BMI category because of my muscle mass. Like, that's not my situation. But like, it's also something that we have to recognize. Like, that shows that it's an improper measure of health.
Yeah. I shared the story of like at my tiniest body that I've ever been in, and at the peak of my disordered eating and exercise, I was like super thin, and my BMI said I was stage 1 obesity. And that just drove the issue even further, mentally, because it weighs on a person.
Yeah.
Especially those who have a weird relationship to being labeled, you know?
Yeah. My experience is similar, right? Like when I was at the height of my eating disorder in high school, I asked my doctor like how I could lose more weight. I was like 16 years old, right? So I'm a child. I should be assessed on a growth curve, not the adult BMI scale.
Yeah.
My doctor assessed me on the adult BMI scale and told me, well, you are in a normal weight range, but your bone structure is very small. So you do have room to lose weight. And that was at the height of my eating disorder, like when I was the skinniest I've ever been since like 10 years old, right? So like, I think that these kind of show pictures of this dangerous road that this type of labeling can place you. And one of the things that I love about my role as a dietitian, I guess, is the ability to like spend time with a patient and understand their motivations. Like, I don't want this to be like ragging on doctors or family doctors or anything like that, because they do so many wonderful things. They're unfortunately in this place where they have 15 minutes to spend with the patient and move on. Like they don't have time to dig into a patient's motivations, to dig into what behaviors do you have. Like they just don't have the luxury of being able to do that. And I think the majority of doctors in the medical field wish that they did, right? Like, I think they wish that they could spend time with patients in that way and dig into it more. And they unfortunately are kind of handicapped in that way, which is really, I think, kind of sad in terms of health. But
I also want to specify that for the listeners, I'm assuming you're in the United States.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, we're in the United States. And I've just recently come to this aha that healthcare in the United States is a privilege rather than a right. And that's a whole other conversation. But that also feeds into why doctors don't have a lot of time to spend with the patients that they do have. But that being said, I wanted to clarify because there are other countries that listen. And then probably some of them would be like, what is she talking about? Like,
Yeah,
so
for
I want to
sure.
clarify, we're in the United States and continue. I apologize for the interruption.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. And I think there's kind of this privilege that's inherent in our ability to even almost have this conversation to begin with. Like, we're in a place in the US where like food is plentiful. We can make healthy choices without changing much about our ease, right? Like, even in other first world countries around the world, they don't have pre-cut fruits and vegetables at the store. They don't have an abundance of frozen and canned options like we have, where, oh shoot, I didn't make a veggie for dinner, so I have this literal steam bag of veggies I bought at the dollar store in my freezer that I can throw in the microwave, right? And have ready in 3 minutes for dinner. Like, lots of places don't have those luxuries that we have when we're having conversations about nutrition, right? Like, I I think it's important to recognize that, and that nutrition is going to change based on your circumstance and your culture and your just life. What does your routine look like?
Yeah, that's big. I'm gonna do like a hard left. Are you open to sharing, like digging a little deeper into your story?
Yeah.
Um, for the sake of the listener, maybe somebody who might relate to you and change their life.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Which part?
Oh, just maybe just like a deeper start to, I don't want to say finish because you're not dead. Um, just like what is your story? How did it start? Was it outside people telling you that you needed to change your body? Was it inside? Was it you telling
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I think now looking back in the research we have on eating disorders today that didn't exist in the early 2000s, for me, I don't think, although I can definitely recognize there was body dysmorphia there, and I see a lot of that now. Like, my daughters are 9 and 11, and I find these old like movies and stuff that I watched as a kid, these old TV shows, and I'm like, we should watch this. And literally, like today in my upper 30s, right? Like mindset, I look at these things and like I can remember like I thought this person was like chubby. Like, what the heck? This girl is so skinny, right? Like, I look at these people and I'm like, what was
Yeah.
wrong with my brain? And like, that is very real. Like, I think the outlook that I had on the world was not real. It was not realistic. I'm not going to speculate how much of that was based on the media. I think there was a lot of that, but I mean, I don't know the number. I don't know how much of that just kind of was how I viewed the world and how much of that was shaped by outside forces. But one piece that now, in my understanding of eating disorders and how I see it, that I really recognize in my own life was a need for control. So when
Mm.
I was in high school, my career goal, which now I think is hilarious looking at who I am and what type of person I am, but I wanted to go to the Naval Academy in the US. So again, we'll paint the picture. I'm in the United States, and in the United States, we have military academies, which is a free 4 years of college as long as you serve in the military afterwards, but you're in an officer role. So you're in like a higher level role. And this is post September 11th. So I was a freshman in high school during September 11th. And I just thought doing military intelligence sounded like the coolest job ever. And I was like, how can I do this? I'll go to the Naval Academy. And in order to get in to military academies, you have to be a specific BMI. You have to be able to run a mile in a certain amount of time, do a certain number of push-ups. You should be involved in like all the extracurriculars. Your SAT score has to be really high, your standardized test scores. I was fighting to be valedictorian or salutatorian. So here I am as a high schooler who already kind of struggles with perfectionism, right? And I'm playing every sport, even though I would not consider myself highly athletic in terms of like being coordinated. Even though like playing sports is fun, like I enjoyed it. I was with my friends. It was fun, but like I was not the star athlete in any way, right? But like I'm doing all of these things. I'm working hard. I'm studying, and my SAT scores weren't high enough and all of this stuff. And I'm playing soccer, which was never really my favorite sport, but would help me be in shape for basketball, right? Like all this stuff that's flowing through my high school mind. And I injured myself my junior year playing soccer, warming up for the last soccer game, which is like so painful to think about. But I tore my ACL. And although there's a high recovery from that, it is definitely something that like is listed right on the military academy site, at least back then, like that's an excluding factor for admission.
Mhm.
And at that point, it was like everything that I have now worked for freshman year, sophomore year, and the start of junior year just blew up because I stepped weird and tore my ACL, right? And I think following that is where it really ramped up. So I think we could probably trace some disordered eating in there before that, but that's the point where everything came crashing down around me. I was on crutches. I couldn't even like go snowboarding anymore. The things that I actually liked, where soccer was not the thing I actually liked, right?
Yeah.
Like all this got taken away from me. And when I couldn't walk around by myself, when my parents had to take care of me, when I couldn't even like go to school because I was at home on the couch recovering from surgery, all this other stuff, like I felt like I could control my food. Following the surgery, I lost some weight pretty quickly just from the nature of like, I also was, I think, allergic to the meds they gave me. They made me really sick. So like this type of thing normally is like a normal thing that happens after surgery. So like dietitians in the hospital, like we're looking and monitoring and giving extra like supplements so people don't lose weight after surgery, right? Like this is a common thing. But I think as a high schooler, I was like, oh, that's kind of nice, right? And that's the point where it really spiraled for me. When I would lose control in my extreme dieting, I would have binging episodes when my parents would leave the house, right, in private. It was just all of that. So that's kind of all the stuff that I was going through at the time. Those were all the things swimming around in my mind. Very much a control issue. And so that idea from intuitive eating, right, of like giving yourself unconditional permission for something, that was so far and foreign in my mind. Like if somebody told me that back then, I would be like, what world are you from? This makes no sense. Like I don't have unconditional permission to do anything in my life. Like anything, right? Like I have to live my life by these super strict standards in every facet of my life, or I cannot achieve success in anything. But what I couldn't see in that moment that now I can see as an adult looking back, or just from this different place in my life following recovery, right? Like when we hold everything so tightly, like we're going to lose everything, right? Like you can't hold on to things so tight. Like we have to hold things loosely. Like things change, things are outside of our control and things happen, and we can't control everything that happens in our life, right? Like as a parent, like I want to keep my children safe. It's my responsibility to keep my children safe. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like something can happen that's way out of my control. They are children and they have their own minds and free will. They're going to make choices that are not things that I choose for them, right? Like we can't hold everything so tight. And I think just to like circle it back, I think when it comes to food, I think it's very easy to be like, we can control this, right? Like this is a factor of our health that we can control. Like, yeah, genetics we can't control, these other things we can't control, but we can control what we eat. And I think that that's kind of this dangerous mentality, which is definitely the thing that started my downward spiral, right? Like, oh, I can control what goes into my mouth. And I mean, yes, on a very basic level, you're in charge of what you put into your mouth, but on another level, yeah, kind of, but like, it's kind of like this whole fight. And I tell this to people and I think they get mad, but I'm going to say it anyways. Like there's this whole fight, right? Organic food versus conventional food. And we don't want pesticides. So we're only eating organic. And I'm like, but that has pesticides. And people are, what? What do you mean? I'm like, it's just different ones. It's the ones that they allow on organic food, right? Like we live in this world and food system where we can't actually control it. It's like this false sense of control unless you are living on a homestead where you grow all of your own food. all of it. And you're sourcing your own seeds for your food. And you are, right? Like, unless you live in that world, you literally cannot control everything that goes into your mouth. Right? Like, you literally can't. Which is a scary thing for some people, right? People that have celiac disease, that's a very scary thing for them, right? Like, this menu says gluten-free, but like, are they going to actually use the dedicated fryer, or are they going to put my stuff in a different fryer and now I'm going to be sick on the couch for 3 days? Like, and I think everybody's personal tolerance for that is going to be different. Some people need more control. Other people are okay with being a little bit more loose in that. But I do think we live in this world and food system where we literally cannot control everything we eat. And a quest where we try to do that is a dangerous, slippery slope.
Yeah. Even weight control. I really don't like that. Those two words put together, weight control or weight manage your weight. It rubs me the wrong way. But I wanted to point out one of the beauties of your story is when you said, you were talking about how you were doing all these things so that you could get to this goal. And you said, as soon as you said, I tore my ACL in a warm up, my brain said, oh, she lost control.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's like, wow. And then like kind of to add, maybe this isn't your story, but when we are trying to control our bodies and trying to control what we put in our mouths and trying to control how we move every day, and we move, we don't get enough sleep, we're doing all these things. Our body, like either you rest or your body will rest for you. Whether that comes in the form of an ACL tear, migraine, if you get sick, like your body will say, slow down, or I'm going to slow down for you. So I don't know. That's kind of what your story made me think of, whether or not that's exactly what you went through. But yeah, our bodies know. Biology always wins.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And something I'd like to just kind of throw in there too is like something I hear in my field a lot that's kind of a misnomer. Like, oh, well, because intuitive eating is against any form of dietary restriction. Like, right, people say that. And like in principle, sort of. But for people that have food allergies, for people who have mandatory dietary restrictions that are like medically necessary ones. Like, I'm not talking about a doctor being like, you should lose weight for this condition. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like actual dietary restrictions. Or we can also go with like religious dietary restrictions, right? So people that are vegan for ethical reasons, whatever. Like, I'm a vegetarian, right? But I also can't eat dairy and I don't really like eggs. I'm vegan, okay? Like, just kind of how it worked for me, right? But like, these are things that we're like willingly choosing, not from this like idealized idea of like, oh, this is my like idealized health, right? Like, these are kind of different things, right? These are things that I would say are choices made for like a higher purpose, right? Like, which is maybe health, right? So like, if you're avoiding milk because you have a milk allergy, like you are still making that choice, right? To avoid milk. You could choose, forget it. I'm just going to drink milk and go out that way, right? Like, you could make that choice, right? But like, we still within those confines and those boundaries that are necessary for whatever reasons. And so like distinguishing necessary boundaries versus unnecessary boundaries, right? These boundaries that are necessary for whatever reason, within that, you can still give yourself freedom to eat unconditionally. So like, I would say the biggest trap that my clients struggle with when I'm going to use celiac disease, just because that's my husband's diagnosis and that's what's most personal to us and my family, is like with him, like the danger when people get diagnosed with celiac is they go on these discussion boards and ask questions because their doctor gave them a piece of paper and sent them on their way. They're not seeing a celiac specialized dietitian. There may not be one in their area, or they just don't know such a thing exists because this is all new, right? Like, and and people are like, well, you probably don't feel good because you haven't given up corn yet. Oh, you should give up all grains. All grains are going to cause reactions. All right. It's like this whole thing. And I'm like, this is not necessary. This is not necessary. Like, go gluten-free. And if you eat a bagel every day for breakfast, go buy yourself a gluten-free bagel and eat it every day for breakfast. And it probably won't taste as good, but like give yourself what you can, right? Like allow yourself the freedom in what you can. Um, because there are real conditions where somebody cannot give themselves unconditional freedom to eat anything because some of these things are literally harmful for that person or go against the person's like ethical code, right? Or religious
Right.
code in some ways. And I think that we can have that freedom within those safe boundaries. So that's something that I kind of see as a flaw in understanding of that theory, right? Like, I think people lots of times are like I am not a fan of people like fad dieting gluten-free, fad dieting in ways that cut out food groups when it's not medically necessary for them.
Yeah. I remember when that was like a huge, I mean, it still is a huge thing, the whole gluten free, but I remember when it started, I was working in a restaurant as a waitress in like a hometown cooking southern like biscuits and gravy restaurant. And I remember the first customer that was like, "What do you have here that's gluten free?" And I was
Nothing.
like, "I don't know what that means."
Nothing.
um, a sausage patty, and I don't even guarantee, but like I
Yeah.
remember when that came out, and then everything for the next few years was like gluten free, gluten free. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like my
Yeah.
husband's had celiac disease since 1997. So like before you anything was even labeled gluten free. Like his mom had to like call
Yeah.
and be on hold with food companies to be like, is this gluten free? Like she could not figure it out just by like looking at a food label like we can today. Um very different world, very different world. But so like in one sense, like I'm kind of thankful that that became a
Yeah.
more fad diet because like now it's kind of everywhere. But then on the flip side, the danger for people with celiac disease, for people with allergies like wheat allergies, for people that need to be gluten free due to like EOE, which is an inflammatory response in your esophagus, like for people that gluten is an identified medical food trigger for them, like this gluten-free fad has almost made it more dangerous for them in some ways at restaurants and stuff. Like peanut allergies are so well known, like no one at a restaurant is going to be like, this is peanut free, like we'll just pick the peanuts out. Like we know
Right.
that we can't do that for people. Like that's super dangerous. But on the flip side, people are like, oh, we can just take the croutons off, or like we can just take the burger back off the gluten bun and put on a gluten-free one because this gluten-free person won't know the difference, right? Like I think we've kind of entered this place where like fad dieting has made it almost more dangerous for people that have serious medical issues, which
Yeah.
is kind of a whole separate righteous rant than the one that we were having on this call. But like
Yeah.
that's something that bothers me being married to somebody with celiac disease where like yeah, one crumb literally can leave him on the couch for like days and he'll have to call out of work and now he's missing work. Like this is a problem.
Yeah. And it's so weird how a fad can both be like a blessing in the sense that you have more options at the grocery store, or you at least these options are now labeled at the grocery store. And
Yeah.
then what you were talking about, how there it's almost like there's the potential for less care to be had in a restaurant, like for the example that you used. So yeah, it's just it's frustrating, and it can I can see how it can be so overwhelming for people. Um, especially with the added social media people who are not trained in movement or nutrition telling you what to eat and what I eat in a day videos, which is another rant also.
Yep.
Um, yeah. Um, I did just realize what time it is, and I
Yeah.
want to respect your time. Um, wow. I feel like we just started.
I know. I feel like we said so many things. I feel like this is like multiple episodes.
I know. And also, if you ever want to come back, I love repeat offenders. Like we can
Okay.
always say, hey, let's talk about this in an episode.
Sure.
just because it's such a big topic. Health itself is such a big topic. I myself have in my programs have 7 pillars of health, and each one is very detailed, could be its own episode, right? So
Yeah.
I'd love to have you back on. We could
Yeah,
just
sure.
chat about this. Yeah, I love it.
For
Cool.
sure.
But I do have one more question for you, which I ask at the end of every episode. And that is, if you had one piece of advice that you could give to the world, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the one piece of advice that I would tell everybody, I feel like I kind of already hit on it. So maybe this will probably be a good close to everything we just said. But the piece of advice that I would tell the world is that you can only do what you can do, right? Like, this is not like a lot of people like to tell people like, oh, well, you only get what you can handle. Like, no, that's not reality, right? Like, we can only do what we can do. And in those hard things where we feel like we can't handle it, where we feel like there's no way out of whatever, right? Look for those little pieces of joy, right? You can only do what you can do. And even if the only thing left that you can do is to find that little piece of joy, that little blessing that exists in it, do that. Like, you can find that. So like when I look back through some of those darkest moments, right, of my life, my biggest struggles, now looking back, I can see and like recognize there's little glimpses, right, of little happy things. So
Beautiful. Beautiful beasts, Sharon McCaskill signing off. Until next time.